Hello and welcome to Conway Video. So I wanted to do a video about finding general solutions. When you're kind of in the midst of a problem and I don't know, you need to get a button on the screen, you need to get a piece of logic to work, or maybe something more general like you need to try to communicate something to a customer or to someone in the business. Once you get really into the thick of it, you'll find you're dealing with very concrete and detailed issues. You're dealing with specific names or places, or you're dealing with specific parts of a system. You're dealing with a specific process about a specific kind of customer, and this specific thing has to happen when this other thing happens, and so on. So you'll get very kind of focused and drilled down into the details. A question I often have in the back of my head when this happens, and you may get this question too, is I wonder if there's a way to generalize this. And so I am actually often on the lookout for opportunities for generalization, whether that's generalization of the way that I'm working, generalization of like the strategy I'm using to solve the problem, generalization of even something as concrete as an email message. If I've taken kind of like maybe 10-15 minutes to write out a really detailed email or Slack message or something, then I'll think, oh, actually, maybe I can keep that message somewhere and generalize it and use it for a more general set of problems or a more general solution. So this is something I often find myself trying to do, is find a more general solution to a specific problem. And so then when you have that in the back of your head, that it is possible to find something more general and that it might be advisable to find something more general, then you can actually often find that it's worth spending a lot of time on something specific, right? So it's worth spending that extra amount of time to get that email just right, so that then I can take that email that I'm sending to customers and reuse it, repurpose it, and actually I can use that generally to solve a whole category of problems. And so it may actually be worth investing, hours or even days to make this perfect email, just because that time isn't only going to be invested in that one specific one-off email campaign. That time can be reused across multiple email campaigns for multiple customers, multiple categories of customer. You could end up reusing that for thousands of customers and generating a lot of money just by getting that one little thing right. So I try and think of that. Everything I'm doing, is there a more general version of this? And so then if there is, maybe it's worth putting extra time into making this one piece of the puzzle into a more quality solution, because I know in future, right now I'm not going to generalize it, but in future, right, I know I can generalize it. I can expand that thing quite a lot and get that thing into a lot of different domains and specific areas that I never thought I could. To give you another example, unit testing, right? So you have this piece of code and it's got a dependency, and it's just very tricky to mock that dependency to get that thing unit tested. So you do end up spending maybe 2, maybe even 3 hours just to unit test that one piece of logic. Now, an outsider kind of coming into the situation might be a bit confused and ask you, why are you spending all this time on this one little unit test? Isn't that a waste of time? Shouldn't you just throw it together and then move on after a few minutes? Now, in some cases, yeah, it's true. You shouldn't be spending a lot of time to make something really quality if that quality is just not going to be useful, if it's not going to matter whether it's a really well-built test or not. But that's something where you've got to be careful, because sometimes you could actually get some use out of it. Sometimes it is actually worth spending those few hours. So you might find that you spend 2 or 3 hours and you get that unit test and the mocked data just right. And then once you've solved that one, then every time you find a similar thing that you need to unit test, all of a sudden, bam, you can just reuse that same kind of way of testing, that same way of mocking. You can go into the code base and look up that code you wrote maybe a month or 2 months ago, pull it out, lift it out of there, and put it into your new instance, your new test, the new thing you're trying to test and build, and bam, it just plugs in. You don't have to do any extra work. And you end up finishing something that should have taken maybe like 1 hour or 2 hours. You end up finishing that in 5 minutes. And so I think that's one of the kind of hidden advantages of putting a bit of time into making something quality. Now, I admit that, a lot of times, a lot of organizations and a lot of workplaces, they're trying to move fast. They're trying to, it's the Facebook mantra, right? Move quickly and break things. A lot of organizations And a lot of contexts, you do need to move quickly. You do need to not get hung up too much. You do need to just focus on the concrete details of the job and get the thing done and move on to the next thing. That's very important. But I do always, in the back of my mind, try to keep an eye out for, oh, I wonder if that thing can be generalized, right? And if I'm not sure about it, I just make a little note about it. Maybe write a little note in my Apple Notes app or in my notepad or whatever I use to keep notes. Make a little note of it and keep going. And maybe at some point later in the day or the next day, I'll come back to that note and think, maybe that thing could be more general, and I'll put a little bit of time into it. And if I can see some progress, then I'll put a bit more time. And so you can see that I'm sort of investing my time, right? I'm always looking out for opportunities where I could put a bit more time and make something more general, and it could be really useful for me. And then over time, I'll start to see a few clear winners, a few things that are clearly kind of worth putting extra time into, because I get all that payoff, right? The next time I have to do something similar to that, which could be quite a lot of times, then I've got that general kind of way to reuse that effort, to reuse that time. So yeah, I'm always on the lookout for more general solutions to something. Another example of this may be like tools. So if I have certain tools that I'm going to reuse, not just across different tasks in my job, but maybe even across many jobs, then it might be worth investing in learning a tool. I mean, a really good example of this, and I do want to do a video about this whole subject, is the idea of mocking a backend. So having a tool that I can use to mock a backend, to set up the backend in such a way that that I can simulate that backend being there, and then that backend can go away, and I can still work on the front end and still work on the UI, and everything still works fine. And then also I can change that mock, so I can put in some data here, put in some data there, and pretend as if that data was available from the backend even before it is actually available. And that's it's worth spending a lot of time on something like that. It's worth spending maybe half a day to get something like that in place, because down the track I'm going to save hours at a time when I need to have that backend data there and it's not there yet. I can just mock it up myself and save a lot of time. And so again, that's a general solution to a specific problem of like, okay, this specific time and date, I need this data from a backend and it's not there. So I solve this problem in a more general way so that whenever I need any data from any backend, I have a way and a technique to get that data into my front end. So for what it's worth, that's another example of, I think, finding a more general solution. I think this extends beyond the realm of code though, and a lot of my videos you'll notice that I like to talk about how things can go just beyond the code. So like, there are things we can do in code and there are patterns and practices and tools, but I think these things can also extend into like business and people and just general problem solving, right? I mean, some of the patterns and the techniques that you use in a business relationship, for example, to build trust or to communicate, those things can be reused. In the design world, if I'm trying to design something and show a prototype of something, the way that I get a prototype to work for one thing can be similar to the way I get it to work for another. And so there again, I can find some general things that are going to help me. I mean, one example, just recently, I just wanted to do something very simple, which is just get a cursor, a little kind of something that looks like a mouse pointer or a mouse cursor, get that thing into a screenshot and just make it be in the screenshot in that position. I was surprised that this wasn't as straightforward and easy as I thought, but I ended up finding a really quick and easy and dirty way to do it. I just went on Wikipedia and looked up the article on mouse cursors and mouse pointers, and I found an SVG image, and I just downloaded that, or it was a PNG or something like that, downloaded the image, resized it, put it into my drawing application, and there it was. There was a cursor. Now anytime I need a cursor, I know exactly how to do it. So now I've solved that problem for myself forever, and for anyone else who uses my technique, I can share that with them. And so these general solutions can be just fantastic. You only have to solve something once, and then every time you have that similar problem come across in work, you can resolve it. But I do think these apply to people, and I want to sort of talk about this in another video in future about how you could also find general solutions to people problems. If someone is asking you a question that you don't know the answer to, or if someone you want to communicate something to someone. There are all kinds of opportunities for generalizing the way that you deal with people. So each situation, you don't have to think about it all over again. You can just kind of go to a general solution about, okay, this person is behaving in this way, I need to whatever, do this with them or do that with them. What's the general normal thing I would do in this situation? And then just do it. It can just save a lot of time, a lot of effort, and just make your day go more smoothly. So yeah, thanks for watching.